Introduction. Here we can see the basic infrastructure. We're going to have users accessing the platform through their device, a computer, a tablet, whatever. And they're going to have an internet browser like Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox. And obviously they also need an internet connection. And we're going to have the platform installed somewhere in a database. It's going to be installed in a server. It's going to have a database. And in the server, we're going to have Windows Server. We're going to have the platform, AuraQuantic, and we're going to have the SQL databases. So if we want to access the database, we're going to have to enter the server. We're going to have permissions to enter the server. This is the very basic infrastructure, but usually we're going to have the database in a separate server. So we're going to have the application, the platform installed in one server and the database installed in a different server. So as we can see, this is the simplest scenario to start working with the platform, although it is recommended to keep the database in a separate server. Now, let's say we enter the server. So now in this example, we can see here, I've actually entered the server or virtual machine where we have the database. Now, once we enter, we're going to look for SQL Server Management Studio. And once we find it, usually it's going to appear here we're going to have a little icon down here where we can access it. We're going to enter. It's probably going to ask us for our credentials so we can access the database. And once we're inside, we can start fiddling around with all the different tables and all the information that's all the columns, all the rows that appear in these tables and these databases. Now, it is important that all the students that are doing this course here are familiar with these type of concepts, like a database, a table, what are rows, and all these different types of things, what are views. Because here we're not going to go into detail of what are the SQL tables or what are the main features that SQL has, such as selector, statements, and so on. So we expect people who are doing this course to already have this knowledge. Now, we are going to go through the basics. So even for those of us who don't have this technical knowledge, we can still follow the course, but obviously it's going to be a little bit more difficult. We might have to check some things up on internet if we want to get a better overall experience through the course. So once we're in here, we're going to see that there's a space on the left side, and this is going to allow me to search for the database. It's also going to allow me to search for the tables within a database. Now, here we can see an example where I already found the database of the platform. We can see in this case it's called AuraPortal BPMS. But we also said that during the installation process, we can change the name. So I don't know exactly what the name is going to appear here in your platform, but it's probably going to have a BPMS behind it. Now, in here, we're going to have lots of different tables, fixed and dynamic tables. I'll explain that in a moment. But the first thing we want to learn to do is filter the tables, because obviously there's a lot of tables and we don't want to go scrolling down in order to find all this information. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on top of this option that says tables. We're going to select the option filter settings, and then we're going to input the name of the table that we're trying to look for. So if we're trying to look for specific data related to the processes, I'm going to put the name of the table here so I can find that table easier. Okay, so I'll show you guys how to do this later on, but this is just a quick example. Okay, so now we click on OK, and what's going to happen? It's going to filter, so it's going to be easier for me to find all the tables. And once I can see all these tables here on the list, I can indicate, for example, that I want to open or select the top 1000 rows just to see what I can find inside of this table. So let's say I do that. And then the system is going to display a list with all these columns, with all the information that I have in this table. Okay. We're also going to talk a little bit about what's a select, what from is, and all these type of things. So here I have a table and all the data is displayed here, and I can see the information. Obviously, what we're going to do throughout this course is explain in these tables what's the information that we're going to find and what's the key information, or what's the most important information that we're going to find in these tables. So here we can see the tables content. Now we're going to see the different types of tables. There's fixed tables and there is dynamic tables. The main difference is that the fixed tables, they're created when we install the platform. So there's a certain amount of fixed tables that are generated once we install the platform in the server. And we're going to talk during this presentation, we're only going to focus on these tables that we can see here. Okay. They're not that many. I think they're about 9. We've got some of them that are fixed and some of them that are dynamic. The dynamic tables are tables that are created when we start building our applications. For example, let's say I need a data repository to store in data about my customers, or I need a data repository to store information about the different courses, or I need another data repository to store information about the company's vehicles. Well, each time I create one of these data repositories or own families within the platform, the system is going to automatically generate these tables to store the data of those families of records. So we know that the designers from the interface of the platform are going to build the applications, and behind what the system is doing, it's actually generating or creating these dynamic tables based on the needs of the designers. So here we can see some examples of fixed tables. I'm just going to give a brief description of each one. So in this first one, we can see here, we can see data from the classes of processes. So every time a new class is created, a new line is going to appear in this table that already exists. Okay, so if we go and we look for this table and we see it empty, that means that we don't have any class of process created yet. So the designers haven't started creating classes of process within this platform. But of course, if we do find some records, if we do find some roles with data, that means that there must be some classes of processes they've been created previously. So that's why there's information appearing. And the same thing happens here with processes, with this other table. In this case, what we're going to find is rows related to every single instance or every single process that's been generated. We already know that each class of process can have one or several instances. Okay, so we design class of process, and once our class of process is designed and it's working, we start to run processes of that class. So in this table here, we're going to have a list with all the different processes that have been triggered, that have been created. Later on, we're going to learn how to relate these different tables. So what processes belong to what class of process, for example. And there's another table that allows me to find all the values that are selected in the prefixes. Another one that allows me to find the term ID, the table name, internal name, description, and so on. We'll talk about this later. There's another one that allows me to find the documents in the libraries and dictionary. Another one that allows me to find the results or the IDs of the options in the simple selection field and the multiple selection fields. And then here we have these dynamic tables. The dynamic table that's called panel ID. Let's say the ID is just making reference to a class of process. So this newly created table that's going to store a lot of data of the processes, it's just going to be called panel ID. And here we're going to have a number. For example, panel 5. What this means is that this table here belongs to the class of process with the ID number 5. So that way we can tie up together this table here, where we have the information of the class of process, with the panel ID table that has a lot of information of the processes. And then we can drill down through panel ID and panel ID. For example, panel 542. In this case, what's going to happen is that whenever we create a group of fields or a multiple selection field within a class of process, it's going to create an additional table. For example, if we're creating a group of fields inside of the process of the class of process that has the ID 5, well, we're going to have here panel ID 5, and over here we're going to have the ID of the group of fields. So that would mean that this table here belongs to the class of process 5 and to a group of fields. And obviously we can go even deeper because a group of fields could have multiple option, or it could have even a affiliated group of fields. So this could go even deeper. So we could even find tables that have panel ID, and so on. Okay, so another very important thing we need to know is that when we're directly manipulating the databases, it's very risky and it could produce unexpected results and errors. For this reason, it's totally prohibited for anyone to ever modify the data that appears in the database. If we ever screw things up, this is not included in the support of the platform, and obviously it's going to have additional cost if we need to call the company for them to fix a bug or something that we've done here. So it's very important not to modify the values that we find in the tables of the platform. Now here we can see some of the most let's say, the most used statements. So I want to explain a few of them. For example, when we enter and we want to find the data, we want to display all the different rows in the table, it's very important to use the statement no lock. Okay. This way, we're not going to affect the performance. Okay. This is all I'm going to say for now, but basically, if we were working on live and we're working with tables in a platform that's actually in use by the client, we're never going to do a search directly. We're always going to put the statement called no lock in order for us not to be affecting all the other users or ruining the performance in the platform. So this would be important in those type of scenarios. Obviously here throughout the course, we're not going to use this because we're searching for the information in a testing environment where only we are accessing. So we know that there's no one else working with these tables. So it's not going to be a problem if we don't add the statement. Now, there's a statement that's called select. This allows me to select the columns that are going to appear inside of a table. So for example, here, if I put select and I put certain parameters, it would limit the amount of data that's going to display down here. If I select from, this is going to help me indicate the table where we're trying to display or we're trying to search the information. So if I say I want to select from this table here, AP, BPM, process classes, that means that the grid down here is only going to display rows of data and columns that belong to this table here. Now, let's say I'm displaying the data of a table, but maybe there's too many columns. I don't want so many to appear, or I don't want so many rows to appear. So we can also filter a bit more. For example, here I'm saying I want to select, I want to see all the data within this table, but only where the ID is number 5. That means it's only going to display those columns where the ID here is number 5. Okay, so here we can see there's a column ID, and I've got all kinds of different IDs. If I want to filter and I only want to show the ones that have number 5, I could do that by putting here ID equal 5. Now, let's say I'm searching in a text field and I want to find exactly, for example, a row that contains this information. So all I'd have to do is say where, indicate the name of the column, and then say equal, and put the name or the value that I'm trying to find. Okay, and this is going to display exactly the rows that in this column contain this value. Now, if I put, instead of equal, if I put like, and besides, I could also put percentages in front and behind, then it's going to display all the lines or all the rows that contain toy in this example, among other values, because with a percentage, I'm saying, well, it could have whatever values in front of the text toy, and besides, with this other percentage value, I'm indicating that it could have all kinds of other values behind these 3 characters, T, O, Y. Okay, so I'm not going to go more into detail, like, using greater than, smaller, and all these other different statements. If anyone's interested, you guys can always check up this information on the internet. We're going to go directly to finding the data within these tables. And this is basically what we're going to use. So as long as we know how to use these options here, we're going to be able to find practically anything within these tables. Okay, so here I just entered this server and I'm going to click here and I'm opening Server Management Studio. It's going to ask me for my credentials. I'm going to connect. And now here we can see I've got all kinds of different databases. I actually have a lot. This is because in this server, I've installed dozens of platforms, but most probably in your case, when you enter, you're just going to find 1 or 2. I want to find the data that's inside of this platform here. I've called it Student Master, where I have, different bits of information for my demos. And if I click here on tables, I'm actually going to be able to expand it, and I'm going to find a lot of tables. So this is a little bit difficult to find. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to click here with my right button. I'm going to say filter, filter settings. And now here in the name, I'm going to add, some text. For example, there's one table. It's a fixed table. It's called Campos Tabla. I'm going to click OK. And here it is. Okay. So now it's much easier for me to locate this information instead of scrolling down and trying to search through all the different tables. And now I'll click with my right button. And for now, it's enough with this option here, even with this one, because I know I don't have a lot of data in these tables. Anyways, I'm going to click on this one here, select top 1000 rows. And here I can see all the information that appears in this table. I'm not going to go into detail right now, okay? But obviously here we can see that we're seeing a lot of different fields, okay, like password, ID, and so on. We'll get back to this table later. Now, remember we mentioned that if I want to find dynamic tables, I should look for panel ID, okay? For example, to search for tables that contain data of a class of process. So I'm going to click here again on filter settings, and I'm going to put panel, and I'm going to click OK. So here we go. I can see I've got several tables that have the word panel in it. Panel 0, panel 1, panel 10, panel 11. Here, I have one that has two different IDs. Most probably, this would be the ID of a class of process, and this is going to be the ID of a multiple selection field or of a group of fields, but we'll check this later.